people who have now died from the explosion possibly caused by a gas leak. For more news with a Catholic perspective, visit EWTNnews.com. I'm Teresa Tomeo, and Call to Communion with Dr. David Anders starts now.
What's stopping you from becoming a Catholic?
Why can't women become priests?
1-833-288-EWTN.
I don't understand why I have to earn salvation.
1-833-288-3986.
What's stopping? Why do I need to confess my sins to a priest?
What's stopping you? This is Call to Communion with Dr. David Anders on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network.
Hey, how about us? We made it to another Friday. Here it's Called to Communion on EWTN. It's the program for our non-Catholic brothers and sisters. So, hey, if that's you, if you've got a question about the Catholic faith, we would love to take a crack at it and hopefully get that question answered for you. Now, because today is Friday, I wanted to just tell you that the phones tend to heat up very early in the hour. So if you don't want to be, left standing at the altar, as it were, phone-wise, my recommendation is call early. Here's our number, 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. If you're listening to us outside of North America, perhaps Australia, perhaps the Vatican, could be anywhere. Here's the special number just for you, the U.S. country code followed by 205-271-2985. You can also text the letters EWTN to 55000. Wait for our response and then text us your first name and your brief question. Message and data rates may apply. And of course, you can always send us an email. We'll lead off with one of those in a moment here. ctc@ewtn.com is the address, ctc@ewtn.com. All right, Michael McCall is our producer, and we also have Michael Birchfield as our phone screener today, and Jeff Burson is on social media. No, actually, I think Ryan Penny is on the JOB. Yeah, I believe he is. He's handling our phone work today. Jeff is on social media. He will be glad to forward any emails that you might want, or any messages actually that you might want to post via YouTube or Facebook Live, because we're streaming there right now. I'm Tom Price, along with Dr. David Anders.
Tom, how are you today?
Very well. How are you, my friend?
Oh, I'm doing pretty decent, thanks.
Big weekend plans? What you got?
Well, I hope to read some books, write some books, and play with my kids.
How is that book coming? I don't think we've talked about that in a while.
This is really good tea I have here.
I knew it. All right, let's go to an email here to save you there, David. This is from Gus. Gus says, I was born into the Catholic Church, left the church when I went off to college, and never had any faith growing up. I later found Christ, my faith in a non-denominational church. I've been listening to your show for months now, and I want to know this. If Christ established Peter as the leader of the church, Matthew 16, verses 17 through 19, well then, how does the church interpret or reconcile that later Christ calls Peter Satan and told him to get behind him, Matthew 16, 23. Thanks for your show, Gus.
Yeah, well, we easily distinguish the person from the office.
Aha.
Very easy to do. It's the simplest thing in the world to do, right? And in history confirms this view of the papacy quite magnificently, that the popes are given a job to do. They're given a jurisdiction, universal jurisdiction over the Christian faithful, to shepherd them, hand on the deposit of faith, and govern the church, and they can, as office holders, they can perform that task well or badly.
Okay.
And they do, either well or badly. Some have done a magnificent job, and in fact, heroically done their job, and they're canonized saints. Some, not so much. You know, I'm fond of saying we had a 200-year run in the Middle Ages without a single pope get canonized.
Yeah.
And not one of them. That's 200 pretty bad years.
Not good.
You know, without some pretty lousy popes going on. So they did their job badly.
Okay.
St. Peter did his job well, right? But he had moments where he kind of faltered.
Indeed.
Obviously, and when he was in Antioch, after the commission, he's off doing his job, and he kind of fell down on the job a little bit. St. Paul had come in and sort of, give him let's call it an aggressive pep talk.
Yes.
To get back on the program.
All right. Appreciate your email, Gus. Here's one now from Joe in Houston, and we'll need a little definition of terms here. Joe says, can a Catholic regularly attend an Sspx Mass and regularly receive their communion? So what are we talking about here, David?
Yeah, thank you. So the SSPX stands for the Society of St. Pius X, and it is a priestly fraternity that was formed after the Second Vatican Council for the purpose of perpetuating sort of a traditional understanding of the faith and the liturgy, and it was formed illicitly. It was nothing squirrely about its formation as such, but the leaders of this organization disobeyed Pope John Paul II when he instructed them not to ordain bishops within their society without his permission. And Archbishop Lefebvre, who was heading up the thing, disobeyed the Pope and went off and made some bishops, ordained them, and incurred the penalty of excommunication. And the society at that point ceased to function with any sort of legitimate jurisdiction or legitimate canonical position within the Catholic Church. Now, the members of the society did not cease to be priests, although they lost many of their faculties to serve as priests. Mm-hmm. They still had that sacramental charism, the priestly charism in their soul, and they could validly, if illicitly, confect the Eucharist. And they sort of developed this sort of parallel Catholic life alongside the Catholic Church and the bishops. You have these fellows who are legitimate, valid Catholic priests and bishops, mm-hmm. but operating without any legitimate jurisdiction and disobedience to the Pope. And since that time, the Vatican has lifted the excommunications, so they're no longer formally under the penalty of excommunication, but they don't have any official standing in the Catholic Church as an organization, right? And so they're still operating in a condition of disobedience. Their sacraments, many of them, not all of them, are valid. And the Pope Francis, actually conferred faculties on the priests of the society to validly hear confessions. Some bishops have conferred the faculty for them to celebrate marriages, but not all. So it's a little bit squirrely as to which sacraments are valid or not. And this so that people who are members of the society who've grown up, families that have grown up in this culture and have never been part of, never been in union with the church through the bishops, could have valid sacraments. So when you ask, can you? I mean, the technical answer to the question is you can. In my judgment, if you ask the more pertinent question, should you? I would say no, right? Because if what you're interested in is the Latin Mass, the Tridentine Mass, there's a way to scratch that itch and still be in obedience to the Pope and the bishops.
All right, Joe, we appreciate your email. Thanks for sending it to us. In a moment, we'll get to the phones, talk with Sarah in Lima, Ohio, also Joanne in Chicago, and we have a line or two open for you right now. Call in early because it's Friday, 833-288-EWTN for the Friday edition of Call to Communion.
When I begin my prayer time, I always enter into it with the expectation that God wants to teach me something. And it has to start with my willingness to share my heart with God, not just say words at Him. So whether I'm using more formal prayers or a more conversational style of prayer, I have to bring my heart and my life and my real self to God. And by having that dialogue, we're able to enter into a deeper relationship, and He's able to show me how to use all the events of my life to draw closer to Him.
Take Two with Jerry and Debbie.
I'm really a revert. There are a lot of converts on Catholic radio, a lot of reverts, those who have come back to the faith. And ever since I came back to a practice of my faith, I started praying the Rosary, going to even daily Mass. God has led me on an amazing journey and used me in a lot of incredible ways that I never dreamed would have been possible.
Take Two with Jerry and Debbie, tonight, midnight Eastern on EWTN Radio.
The wisdom of Mother Angelica.
The only thing new about the heresies in the church and the schisms in the church today is it's mixed with satanic worship. We in the church have gone from enneagrams to centering prayer to solstice worship to goddesses. And you buy it as something new.
For more information on Mother Angelica, visit Religious Catalog at EWTNRC.com.
It's Call to Communion on this Friday afternoon. Our phone number 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. Are you familiar with the term media missionaries? These are wonderful people who prayerfully take EWTN to parishes and the community through the print and electronic media that we provide. You can visit EWTNmissionaries.com today and join us in sharing the eternal word with the world. That's EWTNmissionaries.com. If you're ready now, let's go to the phones at 833-288-EWTN. We begin with Sarah in Lima, Ohio, listening on FM 94.9, a first-time listener. Hey, Sarah, happy Friday to you. What's on your mind today?
Yes, hello. So I've been dating a Catholic for a very long time, and I'm interested in converting. I was raised a Congregationalist, and I understand that there's very many denominations within the Presbyterian Church. So I was just wondering, do you have any tips for converting and for picking a Catholic church? Are they as different as Presbyterian churches can be? And what that looks like. I really don't know a whole lot about the faith other than I've been to some weddings, and that's the only exposure I've really had, unfortunately.
What a wonderful and delightful question. You know,
It is,
I mean, an
yeah.
invitation to discuss the faith with somebody who's just starting out and wants information. So I really appreciate your call. Thank you so much. First of all, in terms of what's the best way to sort of orient yourself towards the Catholic Church and understand what it's about, well, we actually have an official guidebook, and it's a bit lengthy, but it's very useful, and it's called the Catechism of the Catholic Church. And so, if you are interested in if you're kind of a reader, I would strongly recommend that you grab a copy of the Catechism of the Catholic Church and begin exploring. Just start reading in the thing, and you'll begin to get a flavor for what the Church believes and what it's about. That's a great way to orient yourself. In terms of, how would Catholicism compare to other Christian traditions in terms of the variety within the organization? Just like Presbyterian, Baptist, Methodist, or whatever, from parish to parish, from individual church to individual church, you are going to find variation and differences in practice and even in how people express the faith and so forth. Here's the difference. And the way this diversity is understood is different. Within Presbyterianism or Congregationalism, there are doctrinal statements. You get the Westminster Confession of Faith, for example, if you're Presbyterian. And different Presbyterian congregations might say, well, we recognize the Westminster Confession is sort of important historically, but, we don't like these paragraphs. We're taking those out. And I've been in Presbyterian churches that are like that. They're like, I believe this, this, and this, but I don't believe that, and that. And so, kind of a lot of it depends on the personality of the pastor in that particular congregation. Well, Catholicism sees the nature of the church differently. We don't think that the church is just kind of an ad hoc collection of people who orient, around a certain set of practices. We actually think the church itself is a divine institution that was founded by Jesus 2,000 years ago. If you read the Gospel of St. Matthew, Jesus said to St. Peter, "You're Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. And I'll give to you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, so that whatever you bind on earth is bound in heaven. Whatever you loose on earth is loosed in heaven. Whoever hears you hears me. Go therefore, make disciples of all nations. Teach them everything I've commanded you, and I'll be with you to the end of the age." These are the words of Christ to St. Peter and to the other apostles. We believe that Christ founded the church, that has been here for 2,000 years, and that it possesses divine authority to teach, to govern, to sanctify the faithful, and that when we come to Christ, we don't just come to Christ as individuals, we actually join his body, which is the visible Catholic Church. So, we have a stronger conviction in our doctrinal statements, in their authority in our lives, the dogmas of the faith, than you're going to find in a Presbyterian or a Methodist church. So when I pointed you to the Catechism of the Catholic Church, for example, this isn't just a nice book that you can take out of what you like. This is an expression of what all Catholics are professed to believe. You say, and there is variety. There is variety, but at the same time, there are some non-negotiables. You know, a good analogy would be in your Presbyterian church. You know, you might disagree over the music you're going to sing on Sunday morning, but nobody is going to say, well, you know what? I just don't like the book of Isaiah. Let's just get rid of the book of Isaiah, take it out of the Bible. Nobody would think to do that, because all the Presbyterians are agreed that we might have different opinions on music, but we're all agreed on the Bible. Okay, well, that's how Catholics feel about the Catholic Church and tradition. We might disagree on the music, but we're not going to throw away some element of Catholic faith or tradition or the church. You know, it's just not up for grabs.
Right.
And so there's a lot more that binds us all together. But yeah, you know, we sing different hymns.
Indeed. Hope that's helpful for you, Sarah. Don't be a stranger. Call us back another time. That opens up a line for you right now at 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986 on the Friday afternoon edition of Call to Communion here on EWTN. Joanne is listening in Chicago, and she is a first-time caller. Hey there, Joanne. What's on your mind today?
Hi. Thank you for taking my call. I enjoy your program very much.
Well, thank you.
My question, I have two questions on tithing. Many non-Catholic Christian churches are very big into tithing, and I'm left with the impression that it's a requirement to lead a good Christian life, tithing is. And they reference Malachi 3 frequently in their discussions. And then when I've done my own research, I've gone to what I think are legitimate Catholic websites. Some say go ahead and tithe, others say it's not a requirement. So my first question is, what is the Catholic Church's official position on tithing, if in fact they have one? And then the second question is, if we're not required to tithe, how do we arrive at a proper weekly benefit amount to honor God? I mean, what tools do we use mentally to arrive at a proper amount?
What a fantastic question. Yeah, I really appreciate this. Thank you so much. And I sympathize with the confusion you're experiencing over trying to understand this issue, because honestly there are differences of opinion. And you're right about non-Catholic churches often depict this as just kind of a sine qua non, an absolute necessity of the Christian life, and if you don't do it, you're like a bad person or something. Okay, and I get that. I understand that impulse. So, you know, when we go back into the Old Testament where the tithe is actually mandated in Mosaic law, one of the things we notice is that the instructions for the tithe pertain to agricultural produce. So, I mean, if you really wanted to be strict, you know, in the way you read this thing, you'd be like, well, it really stinks if you're a farmer.
Yeah.
You know, but you know, if you're a capitalist and you own capital and factories or, you know, financial resources or something, you might be okay. You know, I mean, if you're really strict on this, it just in the scriptures it refers to agricultural produce. So we can't apply this in a kind of one-to-one correlation to modern life. And also the purpose of the tithe, among other things, was to support the Levitical class, right? And Levites were not celibates. I mean, they had families and wives and so forth, and their jobs were to work in the temples and offer sacrifices. So there's not a complete one-to-one correspondence to the New Testament church. And Jesus doesn't mandate the tithe as a normative part of Christian behavior. He gives a different standard. He says, that if you have two cloaks and you see somebody without one, you give him a cloak. Well, it's not agriculture for one, and that would also look like about a 50% proportion there, not a 10% proportion. But the principle is basically the principle of charity. And care for the common good and care for the goods of the church. And St. Paul, when he deals with this question in the Corinthian correspondence, he says, on the first day of the week, set aside offerings for the poor, as God moves you. And don't, give cheerfully and not under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver. And, Christ gives the story of the woman who puts in the 2 pennies and says that she's given all she has to live on. Well, that woman gave way, far and above 10%,
yep.
And others gave, strict tithe. And so basically the principle is care for the poor, care for the temporal needs of the church, but we're not under the sort of the strict construction according to the Mosaic law. Now, the way this translates in the history of Catholicism, we have something that are called the Precepts of the Church, And one of the precepts of the church is that Catholics are bound in conscience to support the temporal needs of the church. But that's as specific as it gets. The precept is not more specific than that. It does not say you have an obligation to tithe, exactly 10% of your, adjusted gross income. It just doesn't give that level of specificity. And there are some priests that I know who are, who like to use the tithe as a guide, but I'm not persuaded myself that church law or Catholic history requires that strict 10% rule. So you're asking the question, what rule should you use? Okay. Well, again, you have an obligation as a householder to make sure that you have what you need to live, a good life. You need to have food. You need to have shelter. In this modern day and age, I'd say you need health care, maybe some life insurance and, liability insurance and all of the kind of things that go into a good life and care for your progeny and your family. And you probably want to make gifts to loved ones as well and take care of other people's needs as you can. Remember the poor and remember the needs of the church. And to a certain extent, you're free here, and your motive is love and charity and goodwill and not compulsion. Now, if you're just dying for a percentage and you just can't live without one, the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops has suggested that a person might consider giving 5% of their income to their parish and 5% to the charity of their choice. And we hope that you would remember Ewtn, for example. If you chop it up that way, you might remember, the sharing the gospel on the radio airwaves. But again, this is up to you and the guidance of the Holy Spirit in your life and your own sense of what you can afford and what's a sacrifice for you.
Great call, Joanne, and I'm sure that will help a number of people, not just yourself, but a lot of people who listen to this program who are wondering pretty much the same thing. Appreciate your call. It is Called to Communion here on EWTN. Our phone number 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. Here is Rachel now in Denver listening on Sirius XM 130, a first-time caller. Hey, Rachel, what's on your mind today?
Hi, thanks for taking my call. I have a question. I have a friend that I've been trying to get back to church, but I talked to her and she told me that she went to confession and the priest did not forgive her sin that she had an abortion. So I'm confused. Can a priest forgive that sin?
Thank you. I really appreciate the question, and I can see how this would be very confusing and probably upsetting, and so my heart goes out to your friend and also to you. Here's what the church teaches on this issue. Abortion is a sin, obviously. It's also a canonical crime. And in the past, the church made a distinction between absolving the sin of abortion and remitting the penalties that would accrue to the canonical crime. Now, this is really no longer an issue. Pope Francis unilaterally gave all priests of the Catholic Church faculties to absolve the sin of abortion and to remit these penalties, all right? And so really anybody who's contrite, who has had an abortion or cooperated in an abortion can go to a priest and receive absolution. Obviously, we don't know what happened in that confessional, and I don't know what the priest's motive was for refusing absolution. However, I can tell you what a proper motive would be. A priest will not absolve a penitent who's not contrite. Now, I don't know what this friend said in the confessional, and there's no way I'm going to ask, and neither are you, and they're not going to tell, all right? But if a penitent went into the confessional and said, well, I did this, but I had no choice, and and I'm not sorry, well, it's that lack of contrition.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't matter if it's abortion or anything. Anyone who goes to confession and says, I did this, but I'm not sorry, the priest is actually obligated to deny absolution.
Right.
Now, he may have had something else going on, but I have no knowledge of that. The only legitimate reason that I know of that priest would have refused absolution would be if she did not express contrition.
Okay. There you go, Rachel. Appreciate your call. Thank you so much for it. Let's see. AS is watching us on YouTube this afternoon. AS says, why do Catholics have religious items such as a crucifix or a rosary? Why do Catholics have those items blessed by a priest?
Okay, thanks. So, let me give you an analogy. A long time ago when I had first become Catholic, a non-Catholic relative saw me make the sign of the cross and kind of mocked me. And I turned and looked and said, "What, you don't think God speaks sign language?" All right. And that's our belief, right? That gestures can be brought within the orbit of the Church's intercessory prayer. And that same sensibility also extends to blessed items and to blessings as such. Blessings are what we call sacramentals in the Church. They resemble sacraments. They're not actual sacraments, but they resemble them insofar as they're signs of God's mercy and grace and willingness to help us. And the priest's blessing is the primary sacramental in the Church. And when a priest blesses an item, it is as much as to say, "Lord, please have mercy and grant the requests of the person who makes use of this item." It's a way of sort of bringing this item as a sign tangibly within the orbit of the Church's intercessory power.
There you go. And AS, we appreciate the fact that you're listening to us on YouTube this afternoon. In a moment, we'll be talking with Michael in Fargo, listening on Real Presence Radio, Joseph in Florida, and we've got a line open for you. Call now, 833-288-EWTN for the Friday edition of Call to Communion.
Jerry Usher, Dr. Ray Guarendi, Father Benedict Rochelle. You'll hear the leading Catholic voices on the largest Catholic media network in the world. This is the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network.
He is honored by the Church as one of the greatest enemies of clergy sexual abuse.
Matthew Bunson and the Doctors of the Church.
In his time, St. Peter Damian fought against the many vices of contemporary clergy, especially sexual abuses among the clergy. In 1051, he wrote the Book of Gomorrah that is still considered essential reading for fighting abuse today. He died in 1072.
For more about the Doctors of the Church, visit doctorsofthechurch.com.
Hi, this is an EWTN bookmark brief. I'm Doug Keck. Just had the pleasure of speaking with Paul Kengor and Robert Orlando about the book, The Divine Plan. Paul, tell us about this book and why you put it together.
Well, Doug, it's a companion book to a film documentary by the same name, done by Robert Orlando, who's just an excellent, really talented filmmaker. Here you have these two individuals, Ronald Reagan and Pope John Paul II, who, among all things, were both actors. And here were these two men in the 1980s who ascended on this ultimate global stage as they engaged in this dramatic attempt to try to peacefully win the Cold War.
Very good. The Divine Plan, John Paul II, Ronald Reagan, and the dramatic end of the Cold War, along with the documentary, both available through the EWTN Religious Catalog, EWTNRC.com. Thank you, Paul Kengor, for joining us here on this bookmark brief. Look for the entire interview coming on the network and on demand. Thanks.
Many people experience anxiety and rejection when they share their faith.
If you're one of them, let's talk about it tomorrow on Take Two with Jerry and Debbie on most of these EWTN stations.
Now, back to Call to Communion with Dr. David Anders.
It's Call to Communion here on EWTN. 3 lines open at the moment, 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. Let's go to Joseph in Florida, listening on Sirius XM Channel 130. Hey, Joseph, happy Friday to you. What's on your mind today?
Thank you so much. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, go right ahead.
Yeah, so this week we inaugurated the first Catholic president in the country since the inception of Roe v. Wade. And I have a couple of questions. The first one would be, how will the Conference on Catholic Bishops, American Catholic Bishops, U.S. Catholic Bishops treat this in light of the fact that he is not pro-life by any stretch of the imagination? And he's already stated that his faith is an incredibly big thing to him. He's choosing a church right now. So the national image that he's creating is problematic. Secondly, what is a practical way to counsel or to treat standard parishioners who are held, who they believe will be held to a different standard than the president of the country, as Catholics in the pews right now? And then I guess the third follow-up would be, how do you continue to drive pro-life movements at the parish level when they see this kind of action happening? I'll listen.
Okay, thanks. So you understand, of course, in asking me this question, that I am just a little guy who sits in a library and reads books, all right, and then gets on the radio and yaks about things I've read, okay? So in terms of what is my purview over things like national or Vatican policy towards pro-abortion regimes, zip, right? I mean, this is not, fortunately, I'm not in the position of making these policies or trying to craft intelligent responses to social issues, as the bishops do have to do. And honestly, it's not an enviable job, right? So let's pray for the bishops and pray for the president and pray for the Pope, because, as you point out, in some ways we are in uncharted waters, right? This is tough, in other words, this is tough. Now, I'd like to begin my reflections by quoting sacred scripture, Paul's letter to the Romans, chapter 13, verse 1, which he wrote, not after the passage of Roe v. Wade, but under the leadership, the rule, the reign of the Roman Emperor Nero. All right. Now, whatever people might think about this or that regime in the modern era, none of us lives under Nero right now, at least in the West, thanks be to God. But this is what St. Paul had to say about the government in his own day. Let everyone be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except that which God has established. The authorities that exist have been established by God. Consequently, whoever rebels against the authority is rebelling against what God has instituted, and those who do so will bring judgment on themselves. For rulers hold no terror for those who do right, but for those who do wrong. Do you want to be free from the fear of the one of authority? Then do what's right, and you will be commended. Now, St. Paul was not naive. He knew the kind of fellow that Nero was and lost his own life to Nero eventually, who had him beheaded for his testimony to the gospel. So, Paul's counsel that we submit to governing authorities obviously did not extend to the point of violating his own conscience. And, of course, he lost his life because of that. So there, we get two different polarities here to keep in mind. I don't know what counsel the bishops will take. I don't know. I know that the Church has a very long history, a 2,000-year-old history of trying to be faithful to the gospel and to preach the truth and sanctify the faithful, sometimes in under regimes that are more friendly to the Catholic faith and sometimes under those that were less friendly. And there's a lot of practical wisdom built up over a very long time. And I know that the Church plays a long game.
That's a good way of looking at it, I think.
And if you look at the Church's history of engagement in Eastern Europe, behind the Iron Curtain during the Cold War, for example, and the care they had to take in treading that very delicate diplomatic path of how can we bring as much of the Catholic faith and wisdom and guidance from the bishops, but in a situation where those governments were extraordinarily hostile with the Catholic faith and would not think twice about throwing some Catholic bishop in prison. And they had to tread that path for a long time. And the Vatican Secretary of State is not naive about how to conduct himself in these sorts of situations. So I don't really know what the policy will be. I know that, in our present day and age, you can't open your mouth in public discourse without having what you've said be taken out of context, grossly out of context, and then thrown up on social media in deeply propagandistic ways to further the exact opposite agenda from the one that you're trying to promote. And so, how the PR is spun, how the messaging is done, these are complex issues. In terms of the conscience of individual Catholics, we know the truth. We know the truth. And the teaching of the Church is plain, and we have an obligation to live it. And and I would not, it's an unenviable time to be a Catholic bishop. Let's pray for them.
Yeah, absolutely. Appreciate your call, Joseph. This is one of those questions I think we'll be answering a lot in the near future, maybe further on, who knows. Joseph, we do appreciate your call. Call to communion here on EWTN. Let's go to Michael right now in Fargo, North Dakota, listening on the great Real Presence Radio. Fargo and Michael, how are you today, Michael? What's on your mind?
Yes. Well, actually, Joseph kind of beat me to the punch there.
Oh, okay.
My question was similar, but I might flesh it out a little bit and ask, when we are silent or we do not react to the statements of high-profile public figures, our president is not the only one, and the proactive approach they take to pro-choice, in other words, enabling it more and more and more. Could you argue that that our silence is endorsement, that we're not noisy enough about how wrong we think that is?
I appreciate the question. As you were speaking, the thought occurred to me, and I still have in mind St. Paul in his response to the Emperor Nero, right? That activism, political activism, agitation, being a provocateur, these are not the only expressions of social justice. Far from it, and they are in some way the easiest, right? It's easy to carry a placard and make a lot of noise. It's much harder to actually walk into the neighborhoods that are devastated by abortion and try to put human lives back together out of pastoral concern. That's much harder. So if we're concerned about the question of abortion, obviously we're concerned about the children and their mothers. And there are a lot of ways of being charitably, heroically, and sacrificially involved in that ministry that are not political activism. And clearly there are some people who are called to political activism, and that is their vocation. I'm not personally persuaded that that is everyone's vocation, and I wouldn't want to create a crisis of conscience for someone to think that they had to that their engagement with issues of social justice required only one expression.
Okay. Appreciate that. Michael, thank you so much for your call. It's Call to Communion here on EWTN. We have, looks like 3 lines open. Very bizarre. 3 lines open this late in the show. We would love to hear from you at 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. Let's go to Jessica now in DuPont, Pennsylvania, listening on Facebook. A first-time caller. Jessica, what's on your mind today?
Hi. I apologize if this is a bit clumsily worded. I'm a cradle Catholic, but I had a crisis of faith around 2009. I was diagnosed with a severe mental illness, and there was really no resources for me within the Catholic Church as to what to do about that. And I fell into a pagan community, and they told me at that time, well, we believe in enlightenment and reincarnation, but if you're mentally ill, you cannot reach enlightenment in this life. You're, I guess, so hindered that you have to wait until you die and come back. Like, there's no way you can live a life good enough until you get another chance. And I have since returned to the Catholic Church, but since I know we believe that there is one life, there is death, there is judgment, and either heaven or hell and purgatory. And if someone has a mental illness in this life that hinders their ability to really fully live up to their potential as a person of good works, either through impulsive actions or compulsions and things like that, but they still have faith. Is there any stance or saying in the Catholic Church that speaks to people like myself who struggle with this
Absolutely.
and still want to live as good people?
Absolutely.
But I'm worried, when I face God at the end of my life, when I face Jesus Christ, I'm going to have a unfortunate list of things that I have done as a result of illness that I do not want to do, but I feel helpless to fight them because this is a mental problem. Is there any advice you can give or stance you can offer?
Yes. Thank you. I really appreciate the question, and you have my deepest sympathy. And I have some direct familiarity with the difficulties emerging from mental illness and their effects on the spiritual life, and I can appreciate your dilemma, and I'm very sorry. I hope I have some words of comfort for you. First of all, I'd like to stop right with one of the premises of your question, which is a person who is prevented from mental illness from living up to their potential. Well, I'm not sure that the terms of your dilemma require that conclusion, right? What is potential to you, and what's potential to me, and what's potential to Tom Price is somewhat subjective, right? I mean, like, I don't have the potential to become an NBA basketball star. It ain't gonna happen, right? It is not gonna happen. I don't have the potential to become a concert violinist. It's just not gonna happen. I think I have the potential to be a Catholic radio host.
Looking good.
Because what is actual is possible.
Yes.
Okay. And believe it or not, the Church's teaching is you're only morally responsible for those things that are real potentials for you. If something is literally not within your sphere of influence, then you have no obligation there. Right? There's no sin in not doing what you can't do.
Right.
That's the Church's teaching. All right. Now, in terms of mental illness specifically, there have been saints who are diagnosably mentally ill, who have become saints, meaning they achieve perfection. Perfection according to their state of life. According to their state of life. One of them is Benedict Joseph Lebray. Benoit Joseph Lebray. Go look him up. All right, he was a Frenchman. He wanted to enter religious life. He went and knocked on the door of the monastery, and they said, no way. He went and knocked on the next monastery, same thing. And he went and knocked on the door of every monastery he could find from his home in France all the way to Rome. And not one of them would take him because he was mentally ill. And he became homeless in Rome. And he spent his time in churches, and he would pray, and he would beg, and he lived, a pretty deprived life. Mm-hmm. But he loved. And he started gathering the street urchins and teaching them catechism. And before long, the people in the community began to realize that guy's got some issues, but he's a saint.
Yeah.
He's a saint. And he was a saint. He was canonized by the Church. And he's one of many, right? So sanctity, of course, holiness, salvation is possible for everyone according to their state of life. I would also suggest that I kind of hurt when I heard that you weren't able to find any therapeutic help in the Catholic community for your condition, and I would really strongly encourage you to explore the resources of Catholic Family Services in your diocese. And if you're not able to find help there, you're free to call Catholic Family Services in my diocese of Birmingham, Alabama. And I say that with the full permission of the director of Catholic Family Services in Birmingham, who has told me I can say that on the air. So reach out to Catholic social agencies seeking mental health services. I would strongly urge you to do that. And of course, they can't treat you therapeutically on the air, but Dr. Popchak, Dr. Ray Gurendi are two licensed therapist counselors, PhDs in psychology, who can also perhaps give you further counsel on where to go for help. And they're on the air, of course, with EWTN Radio.
God bless you, Jessica. Good to hear from you today here on Call to Communion on EWTN. Tomorrow afternoon on Register Radio, this week, it's been a big week. President Joe Biden sworn in as our 46th president. What are the virtues that we need for this moment? Well, this week on Register Radio, we'll be talking with Catholic commentator and columnist Catherine Jean Lopez. And then we're joined by Professor Helen Alvarez to discuss why the Catholic Church is correct in not letting the abortion issue slide. Check it out tomorrow afternoon, 4 p.m. Eastern, Register Radio, only on EWTN Radio. Let's go to Josh now in Tucson, listening on YouTube. Hey, Josh, what's on your mind today?
Hi, I love a girl named Eden. I want to worship Karapika. Also, I believe in abortion. I don't get what's wrong.
Well, okay. I think we're going to let that one go. Why don't we go on to Denise? Denise is in Cleveland listening on AM 1260, The Rock. Hey there, Denise. What's on your mind today?
Well, my question is this. In fact, earlier you were talking about how, for 200 years, the popes were bad. But my question is, how can the popes be bad, but my understanding is they're all infallible.
Yeah, thanks. So I really appreciate the question. It's a common question about papal infallibility. Papal infallibility is actually very, very strictly delimited. Very strictly delimited. The Pope is not infallible when he puts on his shoes in the morning. He's not infallible when he orders at a restaurant. He's not infallible when he sets policy for the church. Like if he's trying to figure out, a negotiation with a foreign power. He's not infallible. He's not infallible when he appoints a bishop. He's not infallible when he preaches a homily. He's not infallible almost ever when he writes a letter. He's not infallible when he gives counsel to priests or cardinals. He's not infallible when he's talking on the phone to his friend or brother. In fact, he's not infallible almost always. And those sort of regular, ordinary activities of his priestly ministry, of his episcopal ministry, of his papal ministry, and as of his human life, he is just in need of the virtues as all of us. He needs prudence, wisdom, counsel, guidance, justice. He is prone to making mistakes and errors, and sometimes they could be quite egregious and do great harm to himself and to the people of God. He's only infallible when he formally defines a matter of faith or morals as divinely revealed to be held definitively by all the faithful. And he does so very, very rarely, usually only when there's some great controversy racking the church. And there's a need, the faithful have a need for a definitive answer on a controverted question of Catholic faith or practice. And then the Pope will very rarely step in and give that authoritative word. And when he does so, God keeps him from making a mistake in what he says. But even then, the fact that what he says is formally without error does not guarantee that he says it well. So even an infallible pronouncement can be worded badly, can be worded maybe a little bit unclearly, could require further clarification later on, could be given at the wrong time, could be given at an inopportune moment. None of those things are covered by the charism of infallibility. So this is a common. I mean, I was talking to a friend before the show who was had another friend who was upset because some pope somewhere had did something that they thought was a bad idea, and my response was, well, so I mean, Catholics need to decouple their Catholic identity from the person of the Pope, not from his office, but from the person of the Pope. And look, here's a fact about 20th century Catholic history. Since the advent of media, mass media, the Pope has emerged, and I'm not just talking about Pope Francis, I'm talking about, Pope Paul, Pope John XXIII, Pope John Paul II, Pope Benedict, all of them, all these 20th century popes have emerged on the world scene as something like celebrities. And they are celebrities, of course, right? They, have adoring fans that chase after them with cameras and all that celebrities have. And so the temptation is to sort of mentally assimilate them into the cult of celebrity. And, of course, with the celebrity, well, you want to know where they eat, what kind of shoes they wear, and, you want to know what magazines they read, what books do they recommend. And there's a temptation to just sort of reduce the papacy to that sort of celebrity influence and imagine that everything they do is significant for the Catholic faith, when that's really not historically the way Catholics have understood their popes or their relationship to them.
Okay. And we appreciate your call, Denise. Let's go to Tracy in Chugiak, Alaska, listening on the EWTN app. Hey, Tracy, what's on your mind today?
Well, I just wanted to say a big compliment. First of all, I don't know where I'd be without listening to EWTN. It starts my day and keeps me on track with Jesus, basically. My question is, my brother, who is just turned 54, he lives in a small town in the lower 48 in Indiana, and he was raised Protestant, and he had really gotten into Jimmy Swaggart, and then Jimmy Swaggart had his fall from grace, but we talk a lot about Jesus and God, and I really want to introduce him to the Catholic faith, and I wondered, how do I go about doing that on a long-distance way? Do I contact a local parish, or what would you suggest?
Well, I have a couple thoughts. First of all, does your brother read? Would he read a book if you sent it to him?
He's not really into reading.
Okay, I got
books.
another idea. Have you ever watched The Journey Home with Marcus Grodi on EWTN?
No, I have not.
Oh, please go discover Marcus Grodi. Please discover Marcus Grodi.
Fantastic.
Okay. Marcus, one of the most popular shows on EWTN television, interviews converts to the Catholic Church every week. And I'd say probably 90% of his interviews are with people who were former Protestants who've come into the Catholic faith, and they share their reasons for becoming Catholic. It is a very accessible introduction for someone who's not Catholic, and really in exactly your brother's situation, to be introduced to the claims of the Catholic Church. Now, there are hundreds of interviews, thousands of interviews that Marcus has done over the year. They're all fantastic. If you like this show, I'm one of the people that Marcus interviewed, and I did it a couple times with him. So you can look for my name, David Anders, and Journey Home, or you can find one of the many, many others that he has interviewed over the years. And I think that, and introducing somebody, if he likes Jimmy Swaggart, maybe he's attracted to the television medium, that'd be a great introduction. Another one would be, could you pick out some of the classic episodes of Mother Angelica Live? And, I mean, to my opinion, she got Swaggart beat black and blue. I mean, she's the stuff. And lots of people, millions of people have become Catholic from watching Mother Angelica.
Absolutely. A couple of great resources for you there, Tracy. And let's wrap it up with a call from Dylan right here in Alabama, in Mobile, listening on Archangel Radio. Dylan, what's on your mind today?
Hey, so I work with a bunch of youth at Steele High School, and I've had a couple conversations with one or two of them where they've explained to me that they're struggling with homosexual tendencies, homosexual desires, and I've never really seemed to bring any healing. I mean, I can explain, how we can't act on these sort of mentalities, but I've never really been able to gain any concrete help or understanding to the point where they can, make steps away from, from those tendencies, I guess, themselves.
Okay. Yeah, sure. I got just a second or two left. So first of all, one thing I would recommend is, at least in your own mind, maybe not in theirs yet, decouple the question of sexual attraction from the politics and ideology of the homosexualist movement. And in a lot of young people, they don't see a distinction between those two things. They get wrapped up in sort of the cult of homosexuality that's taken over our culture.
It's in.
Make sure you kind of separate those things in your mind and as you're thinking about it. And you deal with the question of homosexuality in teenagers the same way you deal with the question of sexuality in teenagers, which is to, in young people, they don't separate this from the larger questions of their emotional life and connection and meaning and their own sort of ability to emotionally self-regulate. And so sexuality becomes a way, a lot of times, of acting out their deep loneliness. And that's true for all of us, right?
Sure.
But it's particularly true of teenagers who, let's just face it, are not the most self-aware people on the planet.
I know I wasn't.
Right.
Wow, Dylan, thank you for a great question. Sorry we didn't have more time to answer it. And Dr. David Anders, have a great weekend.
Hey, thanks, Tom.
Hope that everybody has a great weekend. We'll see you in here on Monday for another edition of Call to Communion. On behalf of our fantastic team, I'm Tom Price. We will see you then, and you have a great weekend as well. God bless.
This is Colin Donovan. Open Line Friday is next on EWTN Radio.
The leading Catholic voices are on EWTN Radio.
We've started doing these